She stood there in the principal's office, her eyes still fixed on me, and yet she took all the blame. That morning I was sorting through some dusty boxes in the attic. Amid the piles of messy newspapers and old keepsakes, my hand brushed against a crumpled stack of papers, the corners curled by time the edges tangled in cobwebs. It was my high school yearbook, the one I thought I had lost decades ago. I brought it down to the living room, set it on the table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down. As I flipped through the pages, it felt like watching an old, grainy movie suddenly being rewound. Each sloppy handwriting, each laughing teenage face, each rushed and seemingly meaningless message pulled at my chest. There are things we think we have forgotten, but sometimes all it takes is a single line of text and everything comes rushing back, just as vivid and intact as if it had never faded. And then I stopped at a name. Emily Carter. Right beneath that name, the words read, "I hope you always remember, not everyone chooses the easy way. Sometimes someone takes the harder road, just so others can keep going." Emily, I was frozen. The yearbook trembled in my hands, as if the memory itself had just let out a quiet sigh against my shoulder. The day I should have stood before the disciplinary board. The day she walked into the dean's office and calmly took the fall for everything I had done. And that moment, even now, nearly half a century later, still feels as fresh as if it happened only yesterday. Spring of 1975. I, Jack Wilson, had just turned 17, a senior in high school. Not exceptional, not rebellious, not remarkable. Just another name buried among hundreds of others, drifting through the halls like a familiar shadow. I caused no trouble and I made no impression. But my friends were different. I was close with 3 guys, Randy Stocky, always out on the field, even though he was terrible at sports, but made up for it with jokes. Mark with thick-rimmed glasses and a sharp mind. He used more for bending rules than studying. And Sammy, the smallest, wild as hell with eyes that always seemed to be plotting something. We were not part of the honor roll crowd, and we definitely were not delinquents, but we hovered right in that thin middle zone where one wrong step could send you tumbling into trouble. Every noon, the 4 of us would gather in the back corner of the schoolyard, where an old termite-eaten wooden table stood surrounded by tall grass and wild flowers, and talk about the world like we were running the school. Sammy always came up with the plan, switching test booklets, ditching class to see a movie, sending anonymous letters to the class next door. Mark handled the documents, drafting messages, disguising cheat sheets. Randy was security, keeping watch. And me, because of my honest face, I got stuck with the execution. I first noticed Emily Carter in advanced English literature with Mr. Sanders, a second-floor classroom where afternoon sunlight always filtered through the windows, making chalk dust hang in the air like evening smoke. He was an odd man, never yelled, never joked, but had a way of silencing the entire room with just one look. Romeo died for love, Juliet died for belief, and you all, what will you die for? He once asked. I remember not knowing whether to answer or just look down. Emily sat at the second desk right by the window. She always wore either a white shirt or a light-colored cardigan, her hair loosely braided face, thoughtful as if her mind were always elsewhere. She never raised her hand, never gossiped with the others. But once I saw her reading Wuthering Heights while the class was studying Macbeth, and I thought, this girl is not like anyone else. One time I was chatting during class, And Mr. Sanders turned around unexpectedly. Jack, if what you are saying is more important than Macbeth's tragedy, please feel free to share it with the class. Everyone laughed. I looked down, my face burning. While flipping my book open, I dropped my pen. Emily picked it up, handed it to me, and said, nothing, just gave a small nod, but her eyes calm, composed. Not mocking made me feel like maybe I could try a little harder. From that day on, I started paying more attention to her. Not in a romantic way, it was more like curiosity. I wanted to understand what went on in her mind, how she lived, and why she felt like a rock standing still in the chaos of youth. About a month before our midterm literature exam, we started feeling the pressure. Senior year, one misstep could leave a stain on your entire graduation record. Sammy had just gotten an F. Mark had his whole essay crossed out for copying from templates. And me, despite my efforts, I still could not make sense of Hamlet's conversation with his father's ghost. Then one rainy afternoon under the elm tree, Sammy said, "Word is Mr. Sanders keeps the test questions in his desk drawer. It has a lock, but one of those old-school rotary ones." I laughed. "What are you guys planning? Steal it?" Randy grinned. "Not steal, just borrow and return." Mark laid out the plan. "Thursday night, no staff on duty. I've got the room layout. All we need is for Jack to sneak in, open the drawer, and copy the test. You can do it, right?" I hesitated. My heart was pounding. My stomach turned, but I nodded. I do not know why. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe I wanted to prove myself. Or maybe when you are 17, all it takes is a dare. And so that Thursday night, I snuck into the school through the storage room window, the same one Sammy used when ditching class. The place was pitch dark. Wind howled through the long hallway. The hallway clock echoed with each steady tick. I wore thin gloves and headed to the literature room. The lock was just like Sammy said, old and easy to open after 2 tries. I slid the drawer open. Inside was a thick stack of stapled test papers. The top read, "Literature, midterm, do not copy." I pulled one out and carefully transcribed it onto a separate sheet of paper. My hands shook. Sweat beaded on my forehead. The only sounds were my heartbeat and the wind roaring outside the window. Just as I finished, I heard a door rattle in the distance. Someone, a night guard, a teacher, or just the wind. I shoved the paper into my pocket, returned the test to the drawer, locked it, and bolted out of the room. That night, I could not sleep, and I had no idea. Just 3 days later, my name would be called over the intercom, and everything would begin to fall apart. Turns out the price of one exam can sometimes be a whole part of your life spent making up for it. I did not think I would remember it this clearly. Every step I took from the classroom to the dean's office that day, each squeak of my rubber soles against the gray tile floor, every curious glance from classmates looking up from their books, felt like it was frozen in a slow-motion reel. And then when the office door opened, I saw Mr. Sanders standing there with Mr. Raymond beside him, the strictest disciplinarian in the entire school. On the desk lay the literature midterm paper, neatly placed, completely smooth, with a faint pencil mark pressed into the top left corner, the mark I had left. They did not need any more proof. Mr. Raymond did not yell. There were no raised voices, no threats, no lectures. Just one simple question spoken in a voice so calm it sent a chill down my spine. "Do you have anything you want to say, Jack?" I stood frozen. My mind had rehearsed a whole string of confessions lines I'd repeated over and over for 2 nights. but now they were all tangled like a knotted string. I pressed my lips together, my throat dry, heart pounding so loud I could hear each beat. I was about to speak when the door behind me suddenly opened. Emily walked in. She did not knock. She was not panicked. She did not even look hesitant. She just walked in, calm and steady, like she was stepping into a library. Without glancing at me, she went straight to the desk, looked at both teachers, and said, in a quiet but unmistakably clear voice, "Sir, I was the one who took the test." The air in the room felt like it was sucked out. I felt my heart drop straight to the floor. I turned to her, ready to say, "It was not you," but only air passed through my teeth. No words, no courage, just her eyes. For the first time since I'd known Emily refusing to meet mine, Mr. Sanders stood up, clearly stunned. "Emily, are you sure?" She nodded. "I know it was wrong. I accept the consequences." That was it. No explanation, no blaming. No tears. She took it all while I, the one who actually did it, just stood there like a useless shadow. The next day, the second desk by the window sat empty. Emily did not come to class. I heard whispers among the students that she had been suspended for a week and her record would now show serious misconduct, which meant if anything like this happened again, she could be expelled. I sat at my desk, staring at that empty chair, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to want to rewind time. I had stayed silent. I let her take the fall for me, and now I had no idea how to make it right. That night, I sat alone in my room under the soft yellow light of my desk lamp and wrote the first letter I had ever written to a girl. My handwriting shook. Some parts were smudged from my sweaty hands. I did not try to sound poetic. I just wrote the truth. "Emily, it was not you. It was me. You should not have taken the blame. I am sorry. I do not know why you did it, but I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. If I could go back, I would be the one to step forward. I promise. I will never do something like that again. I just hope that one day you will understand. Jack." I folded the letter, placed it in a plain white envelope, and did not write a sender's name. I planned to slip it into her desk the next morning, a small way to say I was sorry, even if it was too late. But the next morning she still had not returned, and the morning after that, still no sign of her. I kept the letter in my shirt pocket. Every time I felt it there, my chest tightened. On the 5th day, Emily came back to class. She wore the same light blue cardigan, her hair braided neatly as always. She walked into the room, opened her notebook, picked up her pen as if nothing had ever happened. The whole class looked stunned. A few exchanged glances, but no one said a word. No one dared. Because everyone knew. Some things do not need to be spoken. I wanted to give her the letter, but I was scared. What if she rejected it? What if she tore it up? What if I only made things worse? During recess, I made up my mind. While the class was outside, I slipped the envelope into her desk. My heart pounded like a thief pulling off a heist. That afternoon, Emily said nothing. She did not show any sign that she had read it. But after school, I saw her stop at the classroom door, turn slightly, and gently place a small piece of paper on my desk. She did not look at me. She did not say a word. I waited until the room was completely empty before I opened it. Just one line written at a soft angle: "Do not waste this second chance." I folded the note and put it in my wallet. I have kept it ever since, even though the wallet has changed many times, even though my life has taken so many turns. but that line has never left me. As for the letter I wrote, I do not know if Emily ever read it. I do not know if she kept it or threw it away. But as long as she understood, as long as she knew how deeply grateful and remorseful I was, that was enough. From that day on, there was a fragile thread between us, not quite friendship, not quite love, but something strange and private, a silent vow, a debt I would carry for the rest of my life. I began to study harder, not out of fear of the teachers, but out of fear of Emily's eyes, the eyes that once looked at me from across the dean's office when she took my punishment and walked away, without looking back. Sometimes in the late afternoons, I would glance over at her desk, where the sunlight poured in through the window. I wanted to say something, but I could never find the right words. And then time passed. We studied together. We made it through each test, each essay. But we never spoke of that day again, and I thought maybe it was all behind us. Until one day, the day she disappeared from school and left me with an emptiness I had never learned how to face. I still remember that afternoon clearly, when the first rain of the season poured down out of nowhere. After school, I didn't go home right away. I stood under the eaves by the library, where Emily usually sat on Wednesday afternoons. She wasn't there. The long wooden bench was wet. On one end were footprints. I didn't know if they were hers. I sat down listening to raindrops tapping the wood, my heart heavy. I wondered, had Emily ever regretted standing up for me? Had she ever blamed me for staying silent? Or maybe she did it because she believed I deserved a second chance. That question stayed with me. Every time I walked by her desk or caught her staring out the window, I felt something tighten in my chest. She never mentioned it, not once. Not a word, not a frown. It was as if it hadn't happened. But it was her silence, how she kept working, kept reading, kept living, that cut deeper. That's when I realized some people forgive quietly. They simply go on and leave you to face your own guilt. One day I saw her behind the library reading Jane Eyre. She always liked books I couldn't get through. I thought about walking over, but I didn't. I just stood there watching from a distance. Then I turned and left, because I wasn't brave enough. After that, I began noticing little things. How she came to school early and paused in front of the bulletin board. How she sat under the elm tree turning pages with her fingertip. How she smiled, soft, brief like sunlight, sneaking through a classroom window. I used to think I understood Emily, but I didn't. She was like a quiet river. You never knew how deep. And maybe that's why I felt even more ashamed. I lived differently after that day, but it took time before I had the courage to find her again. Once Mr. Sanders handed back our essays. The topic was something you regret. I wrote about a March afternoon, a mistake, and someone who carried it for me. I didn't use names. But when Mr. Sanders read part of it aloud, I saw Emily lower her head, not in shame, but like she knew. She said nothing. But before leaving the room, she placed a small notebook on my desk and walked away. Inside were quotes she'd collected from books. On the cover in her handwriting, it said, "Some mistakes aren't fixed with word, but with how we live afterward." I kept that notebook. Through high school, through the years. Even now I open it sometimes, reading her copied lines like I'm hearing her voice again. At 16, when most chased grand things, what marked me most was a quiet act, more powerful than any gift I'd ever received. A silent girl, no words of glory, no need to be seen, stepped into my life like a breeze and left a mark that never faded. I never said thank you, and I was never brave enough to give a proper apology. But from that day on, I started studying seriously. I did my work. I stopped hanging around with the troublemakers. I did not do it to repay her. I did it because I wanted to be worthy of the sacrifice she'd quietly made for me. Because Emily did not just save me from a disciplinary record. She gave me something greater, a lesson in kindness, in selfless sacrifice, and in how one person can change someone else's life with just a single action. And even now, nearly half a century later, I still ask myself, what if Emily had not walked into that office that day? What if she had not taken the blame for me? How different would my life have been? Millstone High sat in an oddly quiet morning. The bell for the first period rang out across the old courtyard. But to me, every chime felt like it landed directly on my chest. I made my way to the second floor, heart heavy, not daring to meet anyone's eyes. Every friend I passed, I simply closed mine, hoping no one would notice the absence in my spirit as I walked. Somehow I found myself back in Mr. Sanders's literature class before I even realized what I was doing. On the chalkboard, Macbeth's lines were still fresh, the slanted handwriting like a breath from another era. Mr. Sanders was reciting a passage, his voice calm and steady. Foul is fair, and fair is foul. But I could not hear a word. The whole class faded. I just put my notebook on the desk, my heart beating so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Then the loudspeaker crackled to life. Jack Wilson, please report to the dean's office. The voice was calm, but to me it sounded like a death sentence. I froze. The hallway in front of me seemed to shrink. All the sounds around me blurred. I walked like a sleepwalker, each step filled with the question, will I be expelled? Will I lose everything? Does no one really know? The dean's office sat behind an old wooden door with a rounded doorknob, polished like a glass orb. I pulled it open like drawing a curtain at the end of a performance and stepped into the room. There was Mr. Raymond, the dean, seated, his eyes discreet but piercing. Beside him was Mr. Sanders, calm and stern as ever, though this time with an air of confrontation. On the desk lay a photocopied midterm exam, the white paper folded in half. I saw the faint pencil mark smeared near the edge, a mark I'd left when I copied it. My chest tightened. Jack is there. Anything you would like to say? Raymond asked, his voice slow as honey but cold as a blade. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My lips trembled, but no words came out. I wanted to confess, to take responsibility, but my voice was frozen. The shame, the guilt, they all rose to my throat, choking me. Then the door opened. Soft hallway light spilled in, like memories flooding from decades ago. Emily walked in. She was not shocked. She was not surprised. Just calm, so calm it felt cold. She did not look at me. She walked up to the desk, her voice as clear and gentle as something from an old book. Sir, I was the one who took the exam. Time stopped. I turned to her. She was steady, not shaken, not regretful, just calm, like the chill of early snow. Her eyes never met mine. She did not plead. She did not accuse. The dim light cast our shadows onto the window pane, two blurred outlines. Outside, misty rain gathered into drops, sliding down the cold glass. I heard each one fall. Each drop sounded like the beating of my heart in that moment. Mr. Sanders stood, brow furrowed. Emily, do you understand what you are saying? I do, she said. Her voice was soft as the wind when it stops. There was a moment of silence. I could hear her breathing steady. I could hear my heartbeat on the verge of bursting. I realized I might have been crying, but there were no tears, just a heart thrown out of rhythm. She lowered her head, a quiet acceptance of punishment. Then she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a hush. An unspoken rule of adulthood had just been enforced. She bowed and left no goodbye, no final glance. I stood there, the room was still. Both teachers were silent, but their silence was heavy as if a boulder had been placed on my chest. I still said nothing. I did not understand why I stayed silent. I just stood there like a ghost. Every part of me wanted to scream. It was not her, it was me, but I could not. Outside the hallway was still. My footsteps echoed alone. The yellow lights flickered above. I ran. I could not look back. I ran to the rain-soaked schoolyard and sat under the dripping elm tree. Rain kept falling. The sky felt unbearably heavy. I cried, but I did not even know why. Was it fear, guilt, loneliness, or the weight of someone doing what no one ever expects? To save me, I could not bounce back academically right away. I looked for her eyes everywhere, but she disappeared from school after a week. Her name was no longer on the test roster. She was gone like a breeze, soft and without a trace. I became the only one left behind, and I moved slowly, too slowly, because my conscience would not let me speed ahead. Back then, I did not understand what lesson I was supposed to learn from being caught from having someone take my place. It was not until years later when I stood before my own students, giving lectures about emotions, that I realized it was a lesson in silent sacrifice. A lesson about how sometimes people save you, not with words, but with the most decisive action. That night I skipped dinner. I told my mother I felt a little sick and went straight to my room, but I was not sick. I just could not face anyone. I could not bear to hear someone ask, "What is wrong?" because I had no answer that could explain the weight sitting on my chest. I lay on my side, staring out the window. The rain swept across the glass in thin strands. A pale yellow glow spilled in from the street lamp down the block, casting the room in a strange, nostalgic hue, like an old film where all you see are silhouettes, never faces. I imagined Emily at that moment. I wondered if her parents scolded her, if she explained, if she regretted her choice, or simply packed her bag quietly, the same way she had stepped into the dean's office that morning. I once thought I was a strong boy, but that night I buried my face in my pillow and cried. No sound, just silent tears, like a hidden rainstorm. I had not stopped her. I had not protected her. I had just stood there, like a coward. I dreamt of Emily. In the dream, she walked into class, sat at her usual desk, the second one by the window, with that familiar brown-covered book in her hands. She turned to look at me, not angry, not blaming, just a quiet gaze, as if to say, "Live right from now on." Then her image dissolved into rain like a poem that never finished being written. The next morning I came to school early, very early. I sat alone in class, watching the morning light stream through the window and settle on the empty chair beside me. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. I should have been the one to step forward. I did not show it to anyone. I folded the page and tucked it into the desk like a silent confession, sent backward in time. In the days that followed, I studied hard. not to make up for what I did, because maybe that mistake could never be undone, but because I wanted to become someone worthy of forgiveness. If Emily had chosen silence, then I had to live in a way that honored it. 1 week later, Emily returned to school, still wearing the pale blue cardigan, still with that loosely braided hair resting on her shoulder. She did not look at me, but as she walked past, she placed a small notebook on my desk, like a message. I opened it. Inside were handwritten excerpts from her favorite books. There was a passage from Jane Eyre, one from Wuthering Heights, and even a line from Shakespeare, "What's past is prologue." I read it over and over. "No, the past is just the beginning." That line felt like her subtle nod to me, not blaming, not haunting, just a way of saying, do not stop because of your mistakes. I do not know if Emily ever suffered, if she ever stayed up crying at night, or if she was simply stronger than me, strong enough not to need anyone to ask how she was. But from that day on, she never walked into the dean's office again, and I never allowed myself to repeat that mistake again. Looking back now, I cannot even remember what questions were on that literature test. I do not remember the grade I got. But I remember Emily's eyes standing in the middle of that office, her voice steady. I was the one who did it. That sentence and my silence afterward are two sides of a moment that has lived with me ever since. Sometimes when I'm teaching now, I look at my 16-year-old students and wonder, is there someone in this class like I once was? Has anyone here been silently saved by a friend and never known how to say thank you? I am not sure. But I hope if there is an Emily in my classroom, then this time the Jack of today will find his voice. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. And that still stays with me to this day. Emily was suspended for a week. Just 1 week, it sounds short, but to me, it felt like an entire winter frozen in the middle of June. Her record said a serious breach of conduct. Dry words, but they landed like a red stamp on her academic path. A scar, one that if repeated could mean permanent expulsion. I still remember that first morning. When I walked into class, the second desk on the left, where Emily usually sat, was empty like a sapling pulled too soon from soil. Morning light slanted in through the windows, casting dust across her desk, quiet and cold, as if even the room understood what was missing. No one said anything, but their eyes said it all. Some stared at me, some looked away. Some glanced at Emily's empty seat, then back to their notes. I started to feel like I couldn't breathe. Every time I bent over my notebook, it felt like the whole room was whispering, "It should have been you." I tried to act normal, studied, wrote, smiled here and there, but every word, every smile felt like it cracked through a painted shell. That week, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily in the dean's office, so calm, while I just stood there, silent, weak. By the third day, I stopped going to recess. I hid in the library, the quietest place I knew, trying to disappear behind bookshelves. I picked up an old novel I'd never noticed before, pretending to read. But I couldn't. My eyes drifted, hands flipping pages without meaning. Then that afternoon, I saw her. Emily, back in uniform, hair tied neatly, walked into the library like a breeze on a hot summer day. I froze. She'd returned earlier than I thought. She walked slowly, unbothered, scanning the shelves like nothing had happened. I shrank behind the shelves, heart racing. I didn't know why I was hiding. Part of me wanted to get up and say something. She moved closer, then stopped at the very shelf across from mine, just a few steps away. I held my breath. She pulled a thin novel, flipped through it, then slid it back. Her fingers brushed the spines, an old, familiar motion. I looked up. So did she. Our eyes met. Just for a second. A fleeting moment, but to me it lasted a lifetime. That look was not angry, was not blaming, was not even sad. It held a little softness, a hint of tiredness, and something that felt almost like forgiveness. I wanted to get up, to speak, to say something, anything. Even just I'm sorry or thank you. But my mouth was dry, my head spinning, and all I could do was sit there, frozen like I had been nailed to that old wooden chair. Emily left first. She walked past me gently without stopping. But as she passed, she placed a small folded note on the table across from me without a word. I opened it. Just one line written in her familiar, slanted handwriting. Do not let this chance fade like words. Written in pencil. I read that line dozens of times. Every word felt like a tiny needle pressing into my chest. Not sharply painful, but persistent and deep. I held that note all afternoon until it softened in my sweaty hands and grew speckled with tiny drops of tears. That night I took out a blank sheet of paper, laid it on my desk, and began to write. Emily, that was how I started. But after just 3 lines, I froze. I did not know what to write that would feel worthy. Sorry felt too small. Thank you felt too light. I crumpled the paper, threw it away, and started again. Writing, erasing, writing again. Eventually I wrote a letter 3 pages long. I told everything about the fear, the cowardice, the emptiness I felt, watching her walk in and take the blame and the guilt I had carried ever since. I did not expect her to forgive me because she had already done that with her eyes. I just wanted to say that from that day forward, I had changed. I did not give the letter to her. I quietly folded it and slipped it into the pages of an old novel on the library shelf, right where she always stood. I do not know if she ever found it, but I hoped somehow the words I never said would still reach her. Emily still sat at the second desk, but from then on there was a silence between us. Not distance, not closeness, just a fine thread I could always feel. And I learned to live with that, with the quiet presence of a girl who once walked into my life in the most unexpected way by taking the blame and silently forgiving me. She came back as if nothing had happened, and I kept sitting there carrying a debt I did not know how to repay. From that day on, I began seeing everything differently. Each morning I didn't look at the sky out of habit anymore, but as if asking myself, have I done something today to be more worthy than yesterday? Because I knew if I ever repeated that mistake, everything Emily gave up would mean nothing. My classmates moved on. Time at 16 flies. A week can feel endless or vanish amid test practice or late ice cream runs. But I couldn't forget. Each time I walked into literature and sat down, I saw the light falling on the spot where it used to catch in Emily's hair. One afternoon I saw her under the old elm tree. A book lay open on her lap and her eyes stared into nothing. No one approached, no one asked. She sat quietly as if the world no longer tried to understand her. I wanted to go to her. I even took a few steps, but I stopped. I was afraid to break it all again with one wrong word. So I turned away. Again, I still have the novel where I hid that letter. I've never read it since. But sometimes I open to that page and see the note I scrawled in the margin. If you find this, know I tried, even if it was too late. Once Mr. Sanders asked me to stay after class. He didn't say much, just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Wilson, a good person isn't someone who never messes up, but someone who faces it." I looked at him and something swelled in my chest. Not shame, not pride. Just quiet gratitude for a teacher who didn't hand me a life sentence. From that moment, I changed for real. I joined the volunteer team, helped sort books in the library. I stopped skipping class, stopped pretending not to care, because knowing even one person chose to save you, that alone was reason enough to live differently. And Emily, she remained the same, quiet, composed, never bringing up the past. Just once when I walked past her desk, she looked up and said, "Jack, you know not everyone has the courage to look back, right?" I nodded. She gave me a faint smile, then returned to her reading. I never really knew what I was to her. A friend? A lingering debt? Or just a piece of memory she would eventually leave behind? But I knew that the person I became, I owed that to her. Some people appear in our lives for only a moment, but they leave behind a permanent change. I do not know why I cried that day. Maybe it was because I remembered the calm look in Emily's eyes as she walked out of the dean's office, not looking back, as if it had simply been something she chose to do. Maybe it was because I remembered the note, "Do not let this chance fade." It stirred a guilt in me, deeper than anything I had ever felt. It was stronger than shame, stronger than fear. For the first time in my life, I cried like a child. Not from pain, not from scolding, not because of heartbreak. I cried because I realized I owed someone an apology, a moment of courage, a truth told too late. And at that moment, my heart couldn't hold it anymore. That night was steeped in silence. I sat on my bed next to the slightly open window, letting in the cool night air. Outside, a light rain fell, and its sound pulled me back to a memory I thought I'd forgotten. I buried my face in the pillow. My sigh was barely audible. Eyes closed, tears welled up. I cried, not knowing exactly why. Guilt, regret, missing someone who wasn't there, or maybe the weight of realizing that a single quiet act, a glance, a gesture could save a life. I didn't turn on the light. A dim glow from the hallway flickered through the door, like a faded memory playing against the wall. I could hear my heart pounding wild, as if trying to escape. It felt like I'd lived in silence. And that night, the silence finally broke, swept away by tears. I never thought I'd cry over a mistake that wasn't even mine. I reached for my desk. My fingers shook as I stared at an old photo, Linda and me in the golden sun of that year. I remembered a gentle hand on my shoulder that morning, a quiet touch. Ordinary, yet powerful. Like being saved again. I froze at the thought, wondering if I even deserved to keep that memory. Because someone had stood up for me and I'd only stayed silent. Tears soaked into the pillow. I took a long breath and sat up. I looked in the mirror. The face looking back was older than I felt, but my eyes held a quiet, stubborn resolve. I was no longer that boy in 12th grade. I was Jack, 68. I had lived enough hurt, enough, regretted enough. And now I just wanted to live better for someone. I wiped my eyes, sat upright, and picked up the old yearbook from my desk. I turned to the final page where she had written, "Do not let this chance fade." I stared at the words, then closed my eyes and whispered, "I won't." That was the first time I cried, not from loss, but from having stayed silent for too long before forgiveness. That night, after crying, everything went still. I went downstairs. My mother was still sewing buttons onto my father's shirt. She looked up about to ask something, but instead just smiled and patted the seat beside her. I didn't sit. I quietly poured myself a glass of milk, the one I'd refused the night before, and brought it upstairs, placing it on my desk. I don't know when it went cold. I just sat there staring at an empty notebook, pen in hand, unable to write. I don't remember how long I stayed like that. Outside wind stirred the trees. From the kitchen, John Denver played softly, "Take Me Home, Country Roads." It was the song my father always played late at night, like a ritual that never changed. And then I began to write. Emily, that was the first line. It felt like stepping into an icy river in early spring, slow, shaky, but deliberate. I cannot recall exactly what I wrote across those 3 pages. Maybe it was an apology, maybe it was a thank you, or maybe it was just the outpouring of everything I had kept inside with no one to tell it to. I told her how it felt to be called into the dean's office, how I had meant to confess but could not find the courage. I wrote about the sleepless nights, the moments I'd planned to approach her but turned back at the last second. I described her eyes, those eyes I still have not forgotten. When I folded the letter, my heart was pounding. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. I placed it on a bookshelf between 2 old novels that Emily used to borrow from the library. I figured if it was meant to be, she would find it. And if not, that was okay too. Because what mattered was not whether she read it, but that I had written it. For the first time, I had faced my own cowardice. The next morning, I arrived at school early. The Ohio air was still crisp, but the sky was unusually clear. I walked into the library while the first light of the day had yet to fully illuminate the shelves. The librarian gave me a small nod, a bit surprised, still not quite used to how often I had been showing up lately. I gave her a quiet smile, then walked toward the last row of bookshelves. I slipped the letter into a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, the one I remembered seeing Emily carry around in her old brown leather bag. I slid the envelope into the middle pages, closed the book, returned it neatly to the shelf, and stood still for a few seconds before walking away. Since then, I never brought up the letter to anyone. I never asked Emily if she ever opened it. She did not change. She still sat in the second row, still read during recess, still answered Mr. Sanders' questions with a voice that was gentle but unwavering. We no longer spoke. But one time, just once, Emily came up to me after class. She stood in front of me, rested her hand on the edge of my desk, leaned in just enough that no one else could hear, and said, "Do not waste this chance." She never explained what this chance was, but I understood. It was not just about the exam, not just about taking the blame. It was everything, the chance to become someone better, braver, more deserving of the trust that someone had placed in me without asking for anything in return. She turned and walked away, leaving me with that one brief sentence. Yet it carried more weight than any moral lesson I had ever heard in my life. And that letter, the one I wrote on a tear-soaked night and hid inside an old book, was never officially sent. I never dared to ask, never dared to face whatever answer might come. But every time I looked into the drawer where Emily used to keep her lavender-colored pen, where she sometimes left little notes, I would think maybe she read it. Or maybe she never did. Either way, I knew one thing from that moment on: I was no longer the carefree 16-year-old. I used to be. I had grown in the way people grow, after someone trusts them so deeply they can no longer bear to let them down. Some letters do not need a recipient because they were written to save the person who wrote them. The June sunlight in my memory is always a strange mix of brilliance and emptiness. After the end-of-year graduation ceremony, the school still held its usual solemn air. But for me, everything had already changed. Standing there in the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by classmates, I looked toward the long row of chairs set up in front of the stage where students would receive their certificates, and that empty feeling returned. The seat next to where Emily always used to sit was empty now. The sky above was vast and blue, but inside I felt tight and small. I had signed my name on the diploma, a piece of paper meant to mark my coming of age. But her name was not there. That thought repeated itself in my head like an unanswered question. She is not here. Why not? The sound of the ceremonial drum echoed steadily from the stage. Its rhythm was calm and firm, like a reminder that life must move forward. Move on. How could I move on when I still carried the image of someone who had taken the fall for me? I felt like a ghost in that summer courtyard, present but not truly seen. One by one, students received their diplomas. Hands waved, smiles shone, but I just stood and watched. I did not wave, I did not smile. My mind was stuck in that June, back to the day I first understood regret, gratitude, and the quiet act of acceptance. When the ceremony ended and everyone began to scatter, I stayed where I was. A few classmates hung back to say, "Congratulations," glanced at me, but I did not respond. They all knew the reason, but no one said it aloud. I turned away, walked down the long hallway, and dragged behind me the weight of every memory. When I got home, I did not go into my study. I walked straight to the garden where the lavender roses bloomed behind the porch. Linda, my wife, now had planted them the day we first moved here. The scent was soft, nostalgic. I knelt down, breathing in the fragrance, and my eyes burned at the corners. I thought of Emily, how she was not there at my graduation, as if she had turned down a different path, one I was never invited to follow. The sadness was not that she was gone, but that she had once been there when I needed her most, and then silently disappeared. I went back inside and pulled out the old yearbook. The final page was still stained with ink. I touched the handwriting gently. Life felt like an invisible thread pulling me across time. I sat down and wrote in my journal, "So you are gone," and I stand here alone in the middle of it all. The words were faint, but each one carried the weight of a heart full of regret, longing, and a quiet wish to meet again, just to say a thank you that was never on time. Her name was not on the list of graduates, but her name still echoes in my heart. June sunlight is unlike any other. It settles over the schoolyard like a thin sheet of metal, washing colors into a pale blur. I stood there shoulder straight in my wrinkled white shirt, not from rushing, but because I didn't care to fix it. I watched students step up to receive their diplomas. Instead of joy, I felt a quiet emptiness. The golden light shimmered on our shirts like maybe my heart was trembling just beneath. No one waited for me to wave. No one asked if I had something to say. A student brushed my shoulder by accident. I flinched. I turned to see a gentle smile. Not judging, not scolding, just enough to stop me from closing up. I nodded, then looked back at the black curtain behind the principal, who was still speaking. His words hit harder than expected. Today we honor effort turning points. and those brave enough to rise after a mistake. I froze. It felt directed at me, but even thinking that I felt hollow. I wished she had been there to scold me even, but I knew if she had, I wouldn't have held it together. So I walked off the stage without a glance back. That afternoon, the school rang with laughter, farewells, and plans. I stood aside watching friends hug, take photos, make coffee plans. Me, I just wanted quiet. I went to the old elm tree, the one that once dropped yellow leaves in spring, and sat head on knees watching the breeze stir the branches. Van Gogh didn't sing, but in that wind, memory spoke. I thought of my mother, of Emily's choice, and the silences I let grow in my life. I wondered in 20 or 30 years, what would this story become if I left without ever turning around? What I've learned is this silence can save or destroy. I stayed silent to protect her image, but that silence also cost me the chance to be forgiven if she ever wanted to. I carried only two things, gratitude and regret. The wind swept the sun away. I stood, took one last look at the school. No voices, no noise. I knew then that June had just closed the last chapter of my youth, one I'd read quietly all the way to the end. Yeah. After that ceremony, I walked home slowly, my thoughts heavy, my heart even heavier. 30 years later, a span long enough to fade most things, but not this. I sat at my vanity, the warm light softening the lines etched deep in my face. Gray strands now woven through the once full brown hair. I stared into the mirror, searching past the layers left by time, hoping to see some sign I had lived well, at least so far. It was a quiet morning, nothing special. Just coffee waiting on the table set by Linda, my wife. Something nudged me to pull out the old yearbook from that memory box tucked in my parents' attic. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed, fingerprints smudged into every line. And there it was on the last page, still leaning slightly, her handwriting. Do not let this chance fade. I touched the words. My chest tightened. The letter I never sent, no name, no address, still sat somewhere on a shelf in the library, written in tears, hidden in a novel I'd never opened again. And strangely, I had lived more truthfully. Through all, I never spoke. Once Linda asked, "Did you ever try to find her again?" I looked out at the blooming rose bushes she had planted and shook my head. But inside, something whispered otherwise. If I saw her again, would I have the courage? My life was peaceful now. I feared seeing her might untangle it all like ivy wrapped around an old scar. I still keep that letter. Its ink-faded handwriting, trembling, the creases sharp as ever. I open it when I miss. A love never named, but never lost. I read, if I could go back, I would be the one to step forward. And I close my eyes. For 30 years, I've tried to live better, to be worthy of that. Once I went back to Millstone for the new library's opening. The halls still creaked, the red bricks unchanged. As I walked, someone asked what I remembered most. I paused, then answered quietly. The silence of a friend, and I carry it with me still. They asked, "Do you still keep in touch with her?" I shook my head. Maybe, maybe not. I said nothing more. That answer, the one I once thought I had buried deep, had never truly left my heart. Linda sat quietly in the crowd, a book in her hands, looking at me through a lens of empathy. She said nothing, but I heard it loud and clear. She knew I had not forgotten. At home, I pulled out an old frame, a photograph of me, and her taken in the school library. She was smiling gently, a book in her hand. I stood next to her, awkward, grateful. I placed the frame on my nightstand. This is who I am now. I thought someone who lives with those memories. Sometimes I dream of her, the same recurring scene sunlight, through the hallway footsteps, and her smile. In the dream, her voice whispers, "You have lived clean of your mistakes." I wake with a faint smile, not from sorrow, not from guilt, but from peace. 30 years later, I still remember, still give thanks. Still carry a quiet regret, enough to remind myself to live better every day. At nearly 70 years old, the things that happened 3 decades ago still touch my skin like raindrops clinging to glass. Whenever it rains, I feel my heart tremble with a mix of longing and fear, like hoping for a miracle while also fearing I will not be brave enough to face it. Last month, during a quiet afternoon, my son tried searching the name Emily Carter, the girl I once studied with, on the internet. He stumbled across an address in Iowa. I froze in front of the screen. 100 memories rushed back the hallway light in 10th grade that rainy afternoon. In the library, her calm gaze, and that envelope I never had the courage to send. I sat there, eyes welling with tears, thinking, she is still out there somewhere. Maybe she read that note, or maybe she forgot it all. But my heart, it is not forgotten. I asked my son to search further, and he found a phone number and an email address. We drafted a letter, word by word. I wrote it myself. My hands trembled, my heart hoped. I will not lie, I was afraid. Afraid to bother her. Afraid to stir up old pain. And afraid that she had built a life in which I no longer belonged. In the end, I typed the email. "Emily Carter, if you do not mind, I just want to say thank you." Then I clicked send. My heart beat so fast I thought it would explode. The next day I got a reply. It was short, gentle. "I have never forgotten. I live near the senior care center. If you would like to meet, I will be at the tea house." I did not sleep that night. A week later, I boarded a slow-moving bus from Ohio to Iowa. It felt like the first time I had ever truly set out on a journey through youth, through time. Every field that passed by the window, every treetop swaying past, made my heart flutter the way it did back then when I first rode my bike around school chest, pounding like it was about to burst open. I arrived at a small house with a warm porch. She was standing there, her hair silver, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. But in her eyes I could still see the same quiet strength I had once known. We sat and drank tea, spoke like old friends, reunited after years apart. No drama, no performance. Just memories like the bricks of the school hallway, laid evenly, quietly. She told me she'd become a nurse, married, had a daughter. She said, "I always believed you would live differently. And now seeing you here, I know I was not wrong." I cried, not because she forgave me, but because I had lived a life worthy of the silence and the sacrifice she once gave. I said, "You gave me a chance to let someone else keep moving forward." She held my hand. No words needed. In her eyes was a lifetime of quiet grace and a kindness that never once asked for anything in return. That afternoon, for the first time, we walked together, two old souls, reminiscing down a sunlit road in Iowa. I smelled the wildflowers by the roadside. They reminded me of that first moment at 16 when I caught the scent of freshly cut grass and did not yet know what I would carry with me forever. Finding her again was not just finding the person who once saved me. It was finding myself the self who lived more fully because I had once been saved. I used to think there were questions that would never have answers. We live with them, sleep beside them, carry them through the years until we get used to the idea that they are simply a void. I used to believe my question, the one that had lingered for decades, would remain that way too. Did she regret it? Did I deserve it? I thought I would never know. But then one early winter afternoon, when the leaves had nearly all fallen from the tree in front of our porch, I received a letter. A real one, handwritten, stamped in a slanted script I had never forgotten. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands trembled. My heart beat on a different rhythm, slower, deeper. I took it inside, made a cup of hot tea, and sat in the old wooden chair by the window, the one where I used to read letters from former students. And then I began to read. Dear Jack, I had not planned to write. Truly, I thought that just seeing you again, seeing you live so peacefully, would be enough. But I did not expect that some things we believe we have forgotten are simply waiting in silence, hoping to be called by name. I paused for a moment. Her words were heavier than the cup of tea in my hand. I kept reading slowly, as if I were swallowing each line. Do you remember the light that afternoon when we sat by the lake saying little? I saw in your eyes not just remorse, but the life of someone who had grown up because of a single mistake. And I want you to know, I never regretted it. I placed my hand on my chest. It felt like someone had just whispered a prayer from some distant year I had long forgotten. I closed my eyes, and there she was again, 16-year-old Emily Small, in her pale blue dress, hair braided, gaze unwavering. The same look she had when she walked into the disciplinary office and said, I'm the one who took the test. Maybe I lost my chance back then. Maybe I had to transfer schools, had to start over in a place where no one knew who I was. But I never thought I had done the wrong thing, because I believed and still believe that you were worth the chance. I do not remember the last time I cried like that. Not tears of anger or of lost youth, but tears of deep gratitude. Someone from half a century ago had quietly laid a stone for me to build my life upon. And now they had come back, not to ask for anything, but simply to say I never regretted it. I sat there like that, in the soft, fading light. Linda, my wife, quietly came and sat beside me. She did not ask anything. She just sat with me. I handed her the letter. She read it, then smiled that warm, understanding smile she always wore whenever I spoke of Emily. She placed her hand over mine and said softly, Now you know. That night I opened the old letter, the one I wrote to Emily in 1975 but never sent. I read it for the first time in decades. The handwriting was youthful, uneven, but still intact. Emily, if one day you ever read this, please know that I owe you something I may never be able to repay. But I promise to live well to make sure you never regret stepping in for me that day. I folded both letters, one old, one new, and placed them into a small wooden box. And I knew that part of my past had finally closed, not in silence, but in forgiveness and in gratitude. A week later, I received a small invitation from Emily, an invite to the grand opening of a new medical center her daughter had just opened. She wrote, If you do not mind, please come. Not for me, but for another generation who needs to hear a story about courage, remorse, and forgiveness. I will go. I will speak. Not as a 16-year-old boy anymore, but as a man who has lived his life repaying a single brave choice made by a girl the world once thought was ordinary, I have lived this life, in part because of her. And now I know forgiveness never comes too late, as long as there is still room in our hearts for gratitude. I sat at my journal desk under the soft glow of a yellow lamp, enveloped in the comforting blend of past and present. The kitchen was quiet, its peaceful hush punctuated only by the gentle hum of the radio playing Moon River and the faint scent of the strawberry jam Linda had just made lingering in the air. I began to write Emily. If one day this old yearbook should find its way into your hands, please know that I carried it through every phase of life since you chose to take the blame for me. You gave me the chance to live differently, and I've lived because of you. Thank you for showing up in my life quietly, yet so powerfully. The words flowed slowly, each one forged from those silent pauses, the tears I shed in my bedroom, the unsent letter, and the emptiness I felt standing in the courtyard the day you weren't there. I gazed at the old yearbook, its cover softened by years, the pages yellowed. Tucked within its final fold lay that letter I once hid. I dared not open it again, afraid of stirring what had been safely tucked away. But I knew it remained there silent, a prayer to the memory for not having been brave enough. I placed the yearbook gently into a small wood trunk. On its lid was a tiny heart carved inches by inches, marked like a memory preserved in time. I asked Linda to keep it safe as part of the past that may become a story I someday tell our grandchildren. Linda smiled at me, an understanding smile, not because everything was healed, but because she knew I had finally written what needed to be said to dispel the shadow that gratitude had cast over me. The next morning, I agreed with our son to open a small children's library in town where I taught before retiring. It felt like the way I could pay forward the kindness I had received. And for the invitation to the medical center opening written by Emily's daughter, I simply penned in the RSVP card, "Thank you for giving me a life not wasted." I did not expect a reply. But if there ever comes a moment when she thinks of me knowing that I carry her in my eyes in these tears or in the slow footsteps of this old man, then nothing will have been wasted. The final scene. After everything, I walk up to the attic where keepsakes patiently wait, an old school notebook, a postcard from my brother Tom, that first letter from Linda. I quietly add a photograph of the two of us, Emily and I, at the Iowa park. Two old friends, gently toasting with tea, grateful in reunion after 30 years. I whisper, "There are debts not repaid by money, but by the life we choose to live." And just like that, the story closes from a 10th grade girl's courageous glance to the belated but complete act of forgiveness, from a youthful mistake to a lifetime built on redemption. I hope this ending is what you envisioned, deep, moving, and true. And if you're hearing this story, maybe that long drive home or seated quietly under your porch, remember someone who quietly helped you move past a mistake, someone you never thanked, a look that redirected your life without you seeing it coming. If this story has touched something in your heart, don't hesitate to subscribe so that together Jack and I can continue to unfold these old chapters, old but never gone. Thank you for listening through to the end. May your day be peaceful, and if you can, may you live a day so beautiful someone remembers you with as much warmth as I remember Emily.